Hi, I'm Meg Speer. I am a graduate student in Mauricio Delgado's lab at Rutgers University. And I'm going to be talking about how we can use positive meaning finding to adaptively update our memories. So vividly recalling a negative experience from the past can bring back those same unpleasant feelings all over again, like remembering doing poorly on an exam. But one way to cope with this might be to find positive meaning in it. So perhaps doing poorly actually inspired you to learn better study skills, which led to a host of positive outcomes in the future. And this sort of positive reframing can make us feel a little bit better about the situation in the present moment. And this strategy of positive meaning finding has been shown to be pretty effective for reducing negative emotion and also increasing positive emotion, making it really central to therapeutic techniques. However, one unexplored question is what happens when we do this? So when we're successful in finding positive meaning in a past negative event, does this actually change something about the memory representation itself? And what I mean by this is the next time we think about this memory, is it less aversive now? Because what we're actually doing is we're recalling a memory that's been updated with positive content. And why we think this might be the case is because we know that memories are reconstructed at the time of retrieval. And once a memory's been reactivated, it can return to this fragile state where it's prone to modification and can be updated with new content. And the classic example of this is with conditioned fear memories. So we wondered, in a similar way, could positive meaning finding change both how we feel and what we remember in the future? And so we tested this across a series of studies. In the first one, we had about 100 participants come in and do a really simple memory paradigm. So all they had to do was recall 12 different negative autobiographical memories from their past. It could be something like witnessing a car accident. And they'd write out a full description of this event and then make a subjective emotion rating on this pretty large scale. Afterwards, they'd do another memory task where they'd have to elaborate a little bit more on each memory. And importantly, a subset of our participants had the opportunity to use positive meaning finding. To test for changes over time, they just came back 1 week later and did this simple task again. So they wrote about and emotionally rated each of the same 12 memories. And when we look at change in positive feeling across time, so this is recall 2 minus recall 1 ratings, where a higher number just means the memory became more positive 1 week later, we do in fact see that people who use positive meaning finding, this is associated with enhanced positive emotion at future retrieval for these same memories 1 week later. And we actually compared this to 3 potential alternatives. So we had some participants who only focused on the negative aspects of their memory. This might be similar to rumination. Another group that wrote about their memories in kind of neutral or unemotional terms. And then a fourth group that didn't elaborate at all. They just did a distracting spatial perception task. And as you can see, no other strategy worked quite as well as positive meaning finding. And so as a next step, we wanted to do this study again to replicate our finding, and we had 2 other goals. So one of them was that we wanted to add in a longitudinal component to see how long-lasting this was. Second, we wanted to compare our positive meaning finding group to a true control condition. So individuals who only naturally recalled their memories and didn't attempt to modify them. And again, if we look across 1 week, we do replicate this finding. Here in blue is the positive group, and in white is the control group. And so again, this is positive feeling change 1 week later. In this study, we also wanted to look at changes in content of the memories. So we had independent raters go through and rate the memories on 2 different dimensions. So one of them was how positive is the content. And so they'd rate this in terms of the language they used and their tone. And then a second dimension was how much the details of the event had actually changed 1 week later, which we just call a dissimilarity rating. And similar to feeling change, we also found that the positive group was associated with, or using positive meaning finding was associated with changes in the content of our memories. So suggesting that it's not just changing how we feel 1 week later, but it's actually changing what we remember. And then importantly, I mentioned before that we added in a longitudinal component. So we had everyone come back 2 months later. And interestingly, all of these effects are still there when they recall these same memories, suggesting that using a strategy like positive meaning finding might not just be having some short-term effect on our emotions and what we remember, but may be having this long-term beneficial effect on our memories that may be really adaptive for well-being. And so the next thing we wondered is, how is this adaptive memory updating represented in the brain? And so in our third study, we essentially did a very similar paradigm, but using multi-session fMRI. So participants come in for the first scan, they do that same memory recollection task. The only difference here is that they're not writing about their memories. They're mentally recalling and emotionally rating 32 negative memories. Afterwards, they do an elaboration task where they use positive meaning finding for half of the memories, and then they naturally recall the other half. And then they just come back one day later, do the second scan, where they mentally recall and rate those same memories again. And so first I'll show you we do in fact replicate our emotion finding 24 hours later. And when we look at the elaboration phase, where participants are sort of actively engaging in positive meaning finding relative to naturally recalling their negative memories, we see regions previously associated with positive affect or reward, such as the dorsal and ventral striatum pop up, as well as prefrontal cognitive control regions like the dorsolateral and ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. But what we were actually interested in is what's going on across these two memory recall sessions. And specifically, does positive meaning finding lead to changes in the neural representation of memory across time? So the idea here was that, we found in our prior results that using this strategy is changing both how we feel and also the details of the event. So in the same way would this be observed in the brain in terms of showing greater neural pattern dissimilarity in the future. And so we predicted that we might see this sort of change in regions previously associated with autobiographical memory, such as the hippocampus, as well as regions associated with positive affect or reward, such as the ventral striatum, as well as the VMPFC, which have both been observed for positive reminiscence, as well as the strategy of positive reappraisal in particular. And so to test this, we use representational similarity analysis. It may be kind of small, but I'll walk you through exactly what we did. So we essentially took the 16 memories from just the positive condition, and we made a dissimilarity matrix in brain space for one of the ROIs. And here on the y-axis, we have recall 1, and on the x-axis, we have recall 2. And what we're really concerned with is just the diagonal, so it's essentially corresponding to the dissimilarity in neural patterns across time within the same memory. We then create another dissimilarity matrix for emotion change across time for the same memories. We then correlate these two to see how strongly emotion maps onto dissimilarity. And then we do this separately for the control condition. And then when we look at changes or differences between the positive and control conditions at the group level, what we find in both the hippocampus and the nucleus accumbens, that there's a stronger correlation between feeling change and neural dissimilarity across retrievals for the positive relative to the control condition, suggesting that this strategy of positive meaning finding is in fact associated with greater hippocampal and nucleus accumbens pattern dissimilarity across time. And so across all three studies, what I've shown is that positive meaning finding can change how we feel and also what we remember in the future. This appeared to be long-lasting as it was still present 2 months later. We also observed this in the brain in regions previously associated with memory and reward. And what I didn't have time to show you is that we actually have 2 other studies in this series. So one of them, we show evidence that this strategy likely leverages the reconsolidation process for updating, meaning that we're actually updating the original memory, we're not just creating a new one. And that it's also more effective than another positive strategy like receiving an extrinsic monetary reward that's positive but is pretty irrelevant to the memory. And so if you want to chat about any of this, I'll be presenting all 5 studies tomorrow in poster session C. And taken together, What I like about this is it kind of suggests that we can think about some of these regulation strategies in terms of going beyond, regulating our emotions in the present moment, but thinking about how they might be kind of beneficially changing our memories in a way that's adaptive for well-being. And hopefully this would have translational potential for individuals with mood disorders or stress-related disorders who have difficulty reshaping their negative memories into more positive ones. And with that, I want to thank my advisor, our collaborators, and thanks so much for your attention.